Welcome to AO On Air. This is a podcast from ActiveOps, allowing us to present you topics ranging from operations management, leadership, technology, and new innovations. Check out all our episodes on YouTube channel AOTV or with your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify. Now let's begin.
Hello and welcome to AO On Air, a podcast from ActiveOps. I'll be your host today, Michael Cups, and I've got a co-host joining us. I'd like to introduce you to Bhavesh. Bhavesh, why don't we start by a quick introduction with you?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Really excited to be here. My name is Bhavesh. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at ActiveOps. Looking forward to sharing the mic with you, trying to learn a lot more about the industry, talk to our customers, and talk to experts in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you. Just to add more perspectives, I think is important. So our guest today is Mr. Stuart Pugh. He's Chief Product Officer for ActiveOps. Stuart, welcome. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, maybe a general introduction of your role and background, please.
Yeah, so my role in ActiveOps is to look after the technology, product, and customer success teams, making sure we deliver products and solutions that provide great value for our customers. This is my second career. Before joining ActiveOps, I spent a lifetime, 25 years in the world of banking operations, a long time with HSBC, mostly UK, a few years living in India, and then 8 years running operations for Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank in the UAE.
Excellent. Well, great to have your experience here. And of course, your role is critical in discussing the topic we have today. So let's get to that. It's an interesting topic. It's introducing a new quarterly performance tracker for financial services that ActiveOps has published and will continue to publish. Stuart, could you tell us just a little bit about or introduce us to the Ops Tracker?
Yeah, so within ActiveOps, we've been benchmarking the performance of service operations teams across the world for around 2 years or so. And in Ops Tracker, we're now bringing insights from that benchmarking activity to the wider community.
Great. And so that it's measuring operations at a kind of a broad scale, or can you just a little bit about what it measures?
Yeah, so the ActiveOps benchmarking looks at how well operations are being run. And I think that's the first sort of important point to get across. So very often, much of the attention in the world of service operations goes to processes and the things that you can do to make processes better or to automate them, digitize them, RPA, and all of those techniques. But we're focused on how well operations are being run, and that's often an overlooked and unloved area. But it is an area that we can do apple for apples benchmarks, looking across different companies and sectors and even regions. So the benchmarking is built around 5 key metrics that we look at to determine how well operations are being run. So we look at your agility, the ability that an operation has to flex resource in order to respond to variation in volume. We look at control, which is all about how capable you are of delivering predictable outcomes, of meeting plans that you have in place. Focus is a metric which says, of the time I am paying for, how much of that time goes to the core work that I want my people to do. Effectiveness is looking at your ability to operate to meet service levels, and efficiency looks at your ability to perform at a stretching but sustainable and achievable level of productivity. So that's really a measure of variation of productivity that you might encounter. We add up all of those metrics and apply a difficulty factor, which reflects the variation that an individual company might experience, the challenge of running operations within that company, and together that gives our Ops Index score.
Great. Stuart, I think it's quite interesting to think about the relevance for the Ops Index and the Ops Tracker now in 2023. So, if I was a senior operations leader in a bank or an insurance company, what have I got to look forward to over the next 12 months?
it's a really challenging time within the world of operations. So we bounced from the pandemic, which just overturned the rule book of how you ran operations. We had all of these migrations of people moving from the office to work at home. I had to invent a whole new way of managing people and engaging them and motivating them when they weren't physically present within the team. We had tremendous dislocations in the type of work that we did. So during the pandemic, traditional business volumes just collapsed, but whole new categories of work emerged for people to do. So just as we are coming out of that and thinking, well, not that operations leaders can ever relax, but just thinking, now we're heading to more settled times, we moved into then what was known as the Great Resignation or silent resignation, but a fundamental change in the relationship between people and their employer. And that was manifesting itself in higher turnover rates, bidding more for talent, really difficult to hire and retain individuals as people's attitudes to work and what they wanted from life altered. From that, we bounced into then the effects of sort of global uncertainty. Invasion of Ukraine led to lots of things happening within the economy. None of us really sure how the next 12 months are going to unfold, but an increased focus on cost and efficiency we're seeing across our customers. So I've now got to operate more efficiently, become more cost effective in a period where I'm already struggling and fighting to retain resource and bidding up for that, and dealing with real uncertainty on the business environment.
Oh, Stuart, but that's. I mean, it seems like there's going to be some really uncertain times for operations leaders over the next 12 months. But if we take a step back to the data again, I guess one of the challenges that people would consider as well, my operations team is different. I have different operations. I manage different products and services. So how does the Ops Index take that into consideration? And you talked a little bit about being apples to apples. How does that actually work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And one of the challenges with traditional approaches to operations benchmarking is exactly that problem. No two organizations serve the same customer set through the same channels with the same products, using the same technologies and with the same sort of risk and compliance processes in place. So when you're trying to compare sort of efficiency at a process level, it's really hard to make any conclusions from that. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, if the benchmarking shows that you're more efficient than the competitors, you believe in it. And if it shows you're less efficient, you'll find the 10 reasons why it's not a fair comparison. In our benchmarking, it's agnostic to process, to strategy, customer segment, looking purely at those metrics, reflecting how well you are running operations. So it is a fair and objective comparison across different companies.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valuable point, because obviously, as you say, if you want to compare, how you're actually running your operations, you kind of need this specific data set. So I understand, Stuart, when we did the analysis, so we looked at the data set from pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and obviously up until the end of last year. So perhaps when you were looking at the data, what were the key highlights? What were the things that, say, surprised you the most in terms of that period of time?
I think two really big surprises came through. So just in that period, as we were going through the pandemic, I would have expected our Ops Index scores to fall as companies were diverted onto other things and maybe operations didn't have the main focus, but the reverse happened actually. And just thinking about that a bit more, it is the case that in that moment of crisis, organizations sort of understood the value of their operations teams, that it is their operations teams that delivers the customer experience that keeps the whole company going. And in that period where there was a perceived threat to the performance of those teams, that focus came in, and how you ran operations became really important, and companies in effect doubled down on that. So we did see during that period the ops index scores rising, even despite all the other challenges that operations leaders had to contend with. The second big surprise was in today's environment, where we have these cost challenges kicking in, actually ops index scores are beginning to deteriorate, beginning to fall back. It's almost as though those lessons from the pandemic of the importance of running operations have been forgotten. People are now focusing on other things. I suspect a lot of focus around digitization, and maybe that value of just running operations well has fallen.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the data set is based on, I think, over 30 companies and, 30,000 employees across multiple regions. So I know I was reading, we've got UK and Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and North America. And one of the things that struck me is, I guess, a real movement between those different territories and different regions. So, for example, the UK was very strong pre-pandemic. All countries rose, but it's eroded so far now where it's now bottom of the pile between those three regions, whereas the US was starting at a much lower base and has increased quite significantly. So maybe it's worth delving into the countries then. So why do you think the UK, and dare I say, has suffered so much in this period of time?
I think that's a great question. I don't have an easy answer to that, although as a Brit, it's embarrassing that we're being beaten by the Australians. So I'd urge us all to come and resume that age-old battle. I think that is a great question. I'd go back, I think, to that general trend of we've seen priorities shift. Mm-hmm. I am a real advocate for running operations well. To me, it's the foundation on which everything else is built. And I often use an analogy of, would you rather stay in a hotel which has great facilities but is badly run, or a hotel which has okay facilities but it's run really well? And whatever you decide as an answer to that, it does make you think about the importance of running things well. And in the context of operations, all of your digitization and improvement projects are going to flounder, be harder, produce less good results if you don't run your operations well. So I would just urge us to put our foot back on the pedal and get really great and focused on the fundamentals of operations management.
Yeah, so I guess there's things like, we're looking at the data set in the UK, and things like control started to decrease. So the planning versus the ability for doing the work, and they're becoming less agile, so less able to flex, and therefore also focusing on more core work. So I guess those core levers just need to be focused on again. That's probably what we're saying, right?
I think so. So that this foundational discipline of production management, having the right people in the right place at the right time, working at the right rate, that is on that everything else is built.
Yeah, so I think if we look at the US and North America, as I said earlier on, it came from a really low base, and it's kind of improved steadily through the pandemic, and it's definitely in a better place than it was prior to the pandemic, but still quite a long way to go. I mean, what would you say the US needs to do in order to really capitalize on the gains they've made over the last 12 months?
I think it's a case of continue to just get better. So they're on the right trajectory, focusing on the right things, and continue that pattern, get even better still.
Stuart, I'm curious, we're seeing in North America quite a bit of the layoff talk, and now it's less in the financial services sector and maybe more in the tech sector. But I'm curious, out of those metrics that you mentioned there, or you talked about the ops index covers, is there one of those that is more impacted or less impacted by things like shifts in the labor market?
I think it will reflect in all of those metrics, actually. So if you have higher turnover within your organization, and historically it will impact your efficiency. Productivity will vary as you bring newcomers up to full speed. You will be spending more time training individuals, so your focus will deteriorate. Your agility will also suffer because you have that training burden to carry that limits your ability to flex resource. So it does have a general and sustained impact across the whole metric set.
Yeah. Interesting.
And, sorry to have to bring this up to you, Stuart, but Australia and New Zealand, right? I know we don't like to be behind the Australia and New Zealand, but they have performed, specifically, well during the last 12, 18 months. And, looking at the data, the control is higher, so they're better at planning and better at delivering against goals. The focus, is lower, but the paid workout per hour is a little bit lower. So that suggests that while there's been great improvements, there's still potentially capacity left on the table. Would you, is that fair a view on what's happening in that region?
I think that is, and we do have to shout out. One of the great joys of my job now is I get to work with operations leaders really across the globe, and you get to see differences in approach, people trying new things for the first time in different regions. And you have to hand it to Australia and New Zealand. They have led the field in the discipline of operations management. So it has been more established, more systematically deployed, greater investment in the skills of operations leaders and in making that a prerequisite of a career path within operations, really professionalizing the practice of operations management. So their performance is really reflecting that ability to consistently run operations well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we saw in the last quarter, and as again reading the report, is usually Australia and New Zealand are pretty much recession proof, and but they usually catch a cold a little bit later than the UK and the US, and it's kind of perhaps a 6-month delay. So while we've seen erosions in the ops index score in the other two territories post pandemic, it hasn't been as dramatic in the Australia New Zealand region. But the last quarter we started to see a dip. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next quarter, whether that trend continues over the next three to 6 months, and see whether they have the ability to pick back up again.
Yeah, and I think we also have the very real effect of the different approach they took to COVID. So they were more insulated from the global pandemic, had tighter controls, didn't maybe have the immediate downsides that we experience elsewhere. But then as they released the controls, that began to have an effect. So yes, I think it'd be really interesting to see those trends.
So I guess we've been talking about the trends from the past, shall we say, the last 12, 18 months. So taking all of that into consideration, what do you think that, are the key trends, the things that operational leaders should watch out for over the next 12 months? I mean, we've talked about the fact that, there's a need to actually capitalize on the capacity that you have on the table. You talked a little bit earlier on about, the traditional methods of cutting costs, which is reducing staff, is probably not going to play out. Bearing in mind you have to, there's a war for staff at the moment. What other things do you think operations teams should be considering over the next 12 months?
I think probably the most interesting one to look at is agility. So the flexibility that you need, and it's almost the hardest of all of the metrics, because you want to create enough flexibility, but not too much. And we see customers who are falling either side of that point. So it's really easy to say, well, I should have, for example, a workforce that's fully cross-trained to do at least one other task or two other activities. But you don't need that scale of investment to optimize your resourcing. So we do see organizations creating almost too much agility, as well as others with not enough.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting balancing act, right? As operations teams start to fine tune all the different resources. One of the other things that was really interesting during the pandemic period, and you mentioned it right at the top of the the podcast, talking about how it transformed the way people were working from home, and we start to see now in every territory where there's battles for employers trying to get their staff back into the office, right? And there's that constant challenge going on. So what we did see is hybrid working really didn't impact productivity. In fact, we've seen from the data that it peaked during the pandemic, and it's certainly higher. What do you see? I mean, in terms of the long-term impacts of that, do you see anything with hybrid working continuing over the next 12 months?
So this is an entirely personal view that yes, it is here to stay. I don't think there is any way back from this. People want it, they like it, or rather they don't like commuting, and almost the price of commuting outweighs that loss of social interaction, and people are finding different ways to have the social interaction that they want. For companies, my view, and again entirely personal view, is that the challenge is, right, how do I build culture when I have a remote working team? How do I get that discretionary effort, the engagement, the sense of alignment to a purpose? All of those challenges, onboarding, those challenges are things we have to deal with in a remote working or hybrid working environment. The answer can't be force people back into the office, right? It's bizarre to argue to increase engagement, I'm going to force people to do the one thing they least want to do. I don't think that's a strategy that works, but that is just a personal view, and I'm sure there's lots of people who will disagree with that.
But I guess it does mean that the metrics that we're tracking in the ops index actually can really help operational leaders fine tune that and make sure that even if it's a hybrid workforce, you're still driving the best productivity that you can.
Yeah, the challenge is in running operations. Right? Operations is a people business, and it's that makes it a science and an art as well. Yeah. And what you're trying to do is get the best out of the people you have. And to do that, we would say there's 4 elements in making that happen. It is around aptitude of people. So do they have the right skills? Their willingness. So have I motivated them, engaged them? Do they want to do the work that I'm giving them to do? Crucially is the opportunity. Am I giving them the opportunity to do everything that they are capable of doing? And then also, last and important element is health or well-being. So I've got to create an environment which is doing all of those things. And the moment you try and just focus on one metric, productivity, you risk upsetting everything else. It is a very delicate balancing act, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's clear, Stuart, that it's fun watching you because you show that you enjoy the data, so that's fun. Bhavesh, I have a question for you. We've talked about the data, we've talked about some of the trends and things like that. If somebody wanted to access this data, is there a way they can get the report?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can jump onto activeops.com/ops tracker, and that gives you basically what Stuart's been talking about, a rundown of the key highlights and the key trends that data has given us, and then you can download the full report.
Yeah, and so we've talked about forward looking. You asked the question of Stuart about the the next 12 months. Can they subscribe to make sure they get these on a periodic basis, or what's the plan for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we plan to release a quarterly report. So every quarter we'll be looking at the previous quarter's data trends and trying to make some sense of it, and then figure out what that means for the following 3 to 6 months. So absolutely. And if you go onto the Ops Tracker page, you can subscribe to it, and then we'll automatically send you that information every quarter.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say thank you both for joining us. Bhavesh, I'm looking forward to our next podcast too, where we have a very large South African insurance and banking customer that's going to join us and talk to us about how their operations changed. So that's going to be fun. So looking forward to that. So everybody listening, stay tuned to our channels, and you'll be able to get that as well. It was fantastic talking to you both, Stuart and Bhavesh. And Stuart, thanks for your insights on the data. We appreciate everybody listening in. And if you missed a different episode of AO on Air, you can find that on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify or your favorite podcasting channels. And we look forward to seeing you very soon on the next one. Thank you very much.